From Ticker, you're watching She's the Boss. Here's Jules Brooke.
Hi and welcome to She's the Boss, the show about female founders and women doing extraordinary things in business. My name is Jules Brooke. Now today, before we get started, I want to have a little bit of a rant again about something that is really bugging me, which is funding for female founders. So I've been doing a little bit of research over the last couple of days as well. One of the facts that I wanted to share with you, which I just think is outrageous, is that only 3% of funded startups are founded by women. 3%. So that means 97% do not get any access to that funding. And according to Scale Investors, which is a company that's been set up by women to fund women, they say that female founders generate 12% more revenue than male-led companies and earn a 35% higher return. So it's totally illogical that we as women aren't being able to get access to much better access to this kind of funding. Only 2.2% of VC funding, which I did read somewhere was 130 billion globally, but only 2.2% of funding in 2018 and 2019 went to female-founded companies, and then only another 10% went to companies that are founded by both men and women. So if you're a female founder, whether you're doing it with a guy or whether you're doing it on your own, you're really at the moment only exposed to about 13% of the global funding that is out there for startups and to scale companies. Now, the other interesting thing, again from Scale Investors, is that women are particularly efficient with the capital that they do get, and we are all running companies with 2/3 of the funds compared to our male counterparts. Now, that doesn't surprise me at all, because I'm often talking to guys who are having access to quite a lot of funding, and yet we're all trying to do it on the smell of an oily rag. In December 2019, so that's to the Christmas just gone, the Sydney Morning Herald wrote an article about it and said that they believe that part of the reason is this what's the word for it? I can't think of the word for it, but this culture of males who are running the big companies, and they're the ones obviously who are investing. So a snapshot is that in Australia, of the top 200 ASX companies, 17 of them have no females at all in the leadership team. Now, if that happens, of course they're not going to be looking for female-founded companies to invest in. So there's just a massive disconnect there. So, rant over, but I just thought I would also just touch on where you can get funding if you're a woman, because there are initiatives out there. They're just kind of hard to access. So, for instance, the Australian government, and I've been watching this one, have got a fund called Boosting Female Founders, which has $18 million to spend over the next 3 years. They're putting out about $6 million a year, which firstly I'd say is quite small. But also, the thing that it causes the massive problem for women is that you only get the money if it's a co-contribution of 50-50. So if you want 100 grand as your funding, you have to find 100 grand in order to qualify. If you want $1 million, you've got to go and find $1 million through private sources first, which to me is just such a high barrier that, again, it makes it almost impossible for us to be able to access these funds. It should be much, much lower than 50-50, I think. I just think that that's really unfair. Scale Investors, who I mentioned earlier, are a fund that is run by women, for women, with angel investing. Now, angel investing typically is the smaller amounts, so normally under $1 million, often under 250,000. So that is one way that you can get access to funds, but again, it's only startup capital. It's not going to help you really grow. There's another one called SheEO, S-H-E and then E-O, like CEO, which is a global fund that's been set up for female founders out of Canada. There is an Australian arm. They do a lot of education as well. And then, of course, there's equity crowdfunding. Now, this is a new thing. It's where you can invest, it's small amounts. It's sort of like crowdfunding normally, only instead of rewards, it's with finance. So, and people get equity in your company. So those are different options that are out there, but basically it is bloody hard as a woman to be able to get hold of any money. Now, we need to support all of our sisters who are scaling, and by doing that, by buying their products or services, by investing in their businesses if they offer crowdfunding, and by sharing stories like this so that it gets out there and people realise how hard it is for those of us who are trying to grow our businesses and turn them into big global businesses to access those kinds of funds. Now, rant over. Sorry, ladies. I have two fabulous guests in the studio with me today. Women I'm delighted to have with me. I have Brigette Engeler, who runs Incognito Sum and is a business futurist and what she calls a pracademic. So I want to talk to her about that. And we have Jo Munro, who's a great friend of mine. She runs a business called Media Savvy. She is also a shopaholic. She is known as the Savvy Shopaholic on some TV stations, and she's a retail commentator amongst many, many other things that I can hardly begin to tell you. So I'm going to welcome, girls, I should say, and cheers, because this is the first time we've been allowed back in the studio, so I'm very happy to see you in real life. I'll start with you, Brigette. Can you tell me a little bit about what a pracademic is, what it is that you do as a business futurist?
Well, maybe I'll start by talking...
And why?
Why? Well, I'll start by responding to the word you maybe couldn't find,
yes.
The unconscious bias.
Right,
which
yes,
is,
unconscious bias.
Yeah, which is why we have things like affirmative action and quotas that some people rebel against but are kind of necessary. So why am I saying it? Because I'm a pracademic.
Right.
So I have a foot in both camps.
What is a pracademic? A practical academic?
A practical academic or a practicing academic. So
okay.
I'm a foresight practitioner or a professional futurist, academically trained, not one of these people who just plonks futurist in.
Yes, because we do know there are people who make up. Yeah, sounds good.
And I'm academically trained in a number of areas, but my first real job out of school, while I was still at uni, was in strategy. So I started as a copywriter.
That's right, and I met you, I think it was 20 years ago, when you were naming businesses. I remember us naming cars and all sorts of things.
All sorts of stuff. I remember us naming one of the reasons I do what I do is I help organisations, whether it be not-for-profits or big companies or small people organisations, is think better and more strategically about what might come next.
Yes.
And about tomorrow's, but doing it today so that we can build in more resilience and a better capacity to think about futures in multiple terms, rather than just saying this is the future.
Or this might happen. It's actually this might happen, but with a whole lot of strategy and some sort of real grunt behind it.
And the reason I do it is because I worked in brand strategy for such a long time that I kept seeing things like, this has got consequences that we haven't thought through.
Right.
And so now I'm able to do a bit of work within an industry and also within NGOs and biomedical projects and health projects, but also get to help torment the next generation of entrepreneurs, innovators and designers, which is probably the real reason I do it.
Right, well that sounds like a very good reason, and what an interesting topic to be doing. Now Jo, you're completely different.
I am very different.
Tell me what it is that you do and why you do it.
What I do is a variety of things. I do
How are you going to distill this?
I know, this is going to be good. Fundamentally, if you're going to boil it right down, I like to help people and businesses make more money and grow what they're doing.
And that comes like in a lovely elevator
lots
pitch,
of it's global.
What it is you do.
But let's drill down on it. So I do work with companies on projects to help their channels. I've worked in channels for over 20 years, since I was 5. No, just kidding.
Before you were born,
yes, exactly. So for a long time in retail channels to market with some of Australia's biggest brands, and I did that in the corporate space where gender communication and gender parity is an interesting subject.
Especially in retail, because you would think women would be running the whole thing,
and also
really.
large corporates. So that's a whole, that we could do 50 segments on that. But that did lead me to doing some coaching, and I wrote the coaching program for John Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus for their executive coaching program.
Wow.
And travelled the world teaching coaches how to coach.
Isn't that amazing?
It's another story. But now I work in basically projects, portfolios and programs of work. I do it still with corporates as a contractor, but I also work with retailers and brands on expanding their media platforms and how they're communicating, and also entrepreneurs. I'm a big fan of single entrepreneurs and helping them get their message out there, whether that's through the media or how they're communicating. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, it sort of is, but then there's another thing that you do, isn't there? So what's that?
There's lots. Oh, as in.
So as in, you are probably a familiar face to some people, who, especially if they love shopping. And let's be honest, as women, we kind of all do. Well, not all of us, because I do know women that don't, but. Not a lot of them. So what else do? You've taken your shopping to a whole other degree, really, your shopping knowledge.
I actually have taken shopping to a whole different place. But it really started out of my knowledge from retail channels to market. And then I met some people doing a lot of money on eBay and I thought eBay was a junkyard. How is this? And I'm a geek as well, self-confessed geek. and shopaholic. So I sort of went, if eBay, I'm geeky enough to understand how eBay works, but it was a long time ago. And if I could just source product cheaply and sell it for more, that's kind of commerce.
Yeah, great model.
Commerce.
Yep.
So what I would do is I'd shop the sales, rebundle products that were trending, and then put a package together so there was no competition for the price point.
Yeah.
Because if you're all selling
Very
those glasses,
clever.
everyone's looking for the lowest
My
price.
14-year-old son, by the way, has started doing that. He calls
There you
it
go.
thrifting. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
So
I
they
love
go
it.
and buy things cheaply at
That's
or
all I did.
eBay.
And then
And it never not had a name.
a publisher came to me and said, you're doing something different with eBay, because it was really going
Yeah,
crazy. I
yeah.
had 3 stores in Australia and 2 in the US, and it was going nuts. And then so I said, okay. He said, you should write a book because eBay's a really hot topic. So I wrote a book called The Savvy Shopaholic.
Right.
When I was promoting the book, I came across the chief of staff at Today's Show who said, would you come and do a segment for us? And I'm like, oh, sure.
Sure, I've been waiting to be like
They're
me.
never going to ring, right? Never. It's such a nice man to say that. And one day they rang, and my motto for insatiably curious is probably how I describe myself.
Yes.
So he rang and said, do you want to do it? And I just said yes. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I thought, what could possibly go wrong? Live television in the Backstreet Mall.
Yeah, no consequences.
So yeah, so from there, one thing led to another, and because I can talk underwater, and I love shopping, and I know a lot about it, not just from being a shopper, but from how the whole
it
retail
works in the
structure
back end.
works.
Yeah.
When I get the tough questions about channels to market and online versus bricks and mortar and all that, I actually can answer because that really is the space I play in.
Yeah.
But the shopping part's the fun part. That's the best thing talking about.
Yeah, and then the other thing where I came across you is you're now teaching people who want to get on morning TV shows how to actually act and what to do. So we'll all be watching you very carefully today,
Yes.
can I say?
Oh goodness, I better sit up straight and behave myself.
So Brigette, back to you. I'm really interested in the business futurist part of your business because I think that's fascinating, and you might have seen that I did that LinkedIn post and dumped you in it going, who would like a crystal ball to see what's happening in the future?
I wish I did have a crystal ball, and I wish that's what it was.
You must have some ideas, though. I'm really interested to know, coming out of this pandemic,
Yeah.
not that I'm going to put you on the spot, but
No,
anyway,
no.
how do you think, because we're all talking about, wow, things have really changed and people have really copped onto themselves and it's going to be really different. Is it going to be different, do you think?
Potentially, but it depends on who you are, where you are, and what's important to you. One of the responsibilities of a professional futurist is not to do predictions. and I'm not, but what we do is help people think about those emerging possibilities. So whether it be taking up an opportunity as it emerges and being able to respond and be really agile to things and pivoting, which I've seen so well done in Australia with lots of businesses. Being able to adjust and respond as things shift is great, but over longer term, it's needing to be aware of where those trajectories might end up. So even these
So have you got some idea? Can you give us, I mean, do you think the fact that we're talking, I mean, authenticity is an overused word, and so is resilience, but it has been everywhere through,
they're important,
through the lockdown.
and that's one of the things in the current environment is that we need to be thinking about not what's next, yes, but please can we just stop saying next normal or new normal, because what we have is what we have.
That's right.
And next year is probably going to be more like this year than like last year.
Yes, true.
We've got different conditions, we've got different spending abilities, we've got people who are being buoyed by the current shifts in the economy, others who are being contributed, pampered, absolutely. And so all of those things come into play. I think some of the things that I can see is a lot more organisations looking at their risk management, looking at how they anticipate things. I know of a number of organisations that did not have a proper policy in place for pandemic.
No,
that's not
kind of understandably, but also
except that we knew about this. So
Yes.
the thing that we
It's
are
always
going
been a
through has
possibility.
always been around.
Yeah.
And those discussions about, oh, it's a black swan. No, it's not. That's maybe a black elephant. But it's not a black swan. And so the advice that I would give everyone is to think longer term and be really aware of what's going on outside yourself and outside your organisation.
Do you think that it's going to affect, now a lot of people have been talking about everyone being on Zoom, and you know how and I have to say that, you know, the older generation, so my parents' level and above, grandparents' level, are being dragged into the technology age very, very fast. But I think as we familiarise ourselves, is that going to be something that people embrace going forward? There have to be some large companies going,
Yeah, but I
You
think
know,
also
what the
we've got to
hell?
look at all of those other things that came before us. So when it comes to trends, if you look back 5 or 10 years, there are things that we were told would happen that didn't happen. There are things that we were told wouldn't happen that have happened, and a whole lot of other stuff has happened that no one talked about.
Right.
We've been told about the death of print since the 90s. You're reading off something that
Yes.
is printed. We still have printed material. So,
And
what-
yet, when I consume media these days, I want to do it on my on-demand
Exactly.
only, and I want to do it digitally. It's
And
very rare that I would
it's up to
read.
us to think about how much we respond to those changes, and if and this is where I get into the more philosophical areas of foresight, which is we have so many different opportunities. It's up to us to shape them, and it's
Interesting.
important that in the next couple of years that we don't forget that there are people in this situation. We
Yes.
talk about all being in the same, all being in it together,
we're not
but
at
we're not
all.
all in the
No.
same boat.
No, we're not.
And so it's thinking through what are the consequences of my actions today, and supporting
That's actually
retailers.
really- that's a really good idea
In
to-
really being pragmatic about
Yeah.
what we can do, and yeah.
Great.
And-
Okay, so over to you. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot either. But as the retail expert
Yep.
and seeing what has happened,
A lot's happening.
can you give me a little snapshot as to how you think this is going to affect things going forward?
Well, it's really interesting when everyone went to buy toilet paper.
Yes.
It wasn't my first reaction.
No, it wasn't
But
mine either.
it caught everyone by surprise,
It
the
did.
panic.
Yeah.
And then the flour and sugar and all the
and the
baking
funny
thing
thing
up.
was, if people didn't grow up with depression parents, my parents were the youngest of their family, so
Yeah.
their family talked about the depression and
Yeah.
survival, and so we got a lot of that training. So when everyone ran out and bought toilet paper, I'm like, I'm not worried about toilet paper. There are other things you can do.
Absolutely.
However, I do want canned food flour if this is going to shut
Yes,
everything
yeah.
down.
Yeah.
The survive. So I
And
felt
alcohol.
like, oh, I did go and buy. That's true. No,
The bottle
good
shops
point.
did. It was like Christmas, I
Absolutely.
think, for them.
Cash, batteries.
Yeah, so
Cash,
all those
ironically,
things.
which of course, when you go into shops now, they're like, I
Yeah, they don't want to
cash,
touch
you
it.
touched
Yeah.
But that was
Touch
what was
this.
interesting. But also, I heard people saying about, oh well, you know, the grocery stores are doing great, and I'm saying, yeah, but what about all the commercial people who have to shut their shops? So all the suppliers, all the manufacturers, all the producers
whole supply chain
going
was
into
affected.
commercial
Yeah.
just died, and then they had to find a way to get their product to
Products out.
market. So talking about pivoting and being agile, there were some great companies who just went, we're going to survive no matter what, and they turned online. I have been talking about getting bricks and mortar companies online
Yes.
forever.
Yes,
For-
yes.
That was
Yeah.
basically
It's
the
been-
platform
they
I
were-
started on.
and the ones
and
that
no one
didn't-
listened. There's like 8% of turnover
Was
is
that
online
really?
in retail. I think
Really?
last year's numbers, I'm not sure right now. I think it would have
didn't realise
grown.
it was that low,
It was
'cause
only
I only buy
8%
online.
online.
Right.
Now I think you'll find, I think the American number was that currently it's 15% and growing.
Yeah,
So
because
you're
I
going to
know-
find that's flipping.
And there are some stores, I saw an article about, is it Platypus Shoes and that
Yep.
group saying
Yep.
we're going to close our stores,
Yeah.
we're going
That's
to have just a
right.
few,
Yeah.
which is what I remember talking
Yep.
about this 10 or 20
That's
years
right.
ago. There will be stores where you go and experience
Well, you need to
what
touch
things
and
look
feel.
like
Yeah.
and whether
Yeah.
they fit you, and then you'll go and buy them online.
That's right. So there is going to be a shift in retail, but retail has been in shift for the last
Yes.
5 years.
Yeah.
So the guys
Online
that didn't see
without
this
any-
coming
Yeah.
are dinosaurs, because
Right.
we've been talking about it. We couldn't see the pandemic coming, although most companies, as a project manager, everyone should have a business
have had
continuity plan. And if they don't, they need to hire a project manager now to do one.
Yes.
Seriously, I've done a lot of them over the years, but they should have thought about what happens if the power goes out? What happens if a satellite dies? What happens if
What- and of
Melbourne's
course-
power grid
And
goes
the
out?
other
What if
thing
we
that
can't
came out of
travel?
this, that was like, and what happens if the internet dies?
Correct.
And that has
Can you go
happened.
to paper?
It has
Yeah.
happened, but I
Yeah.
mean, no one is now, so everyone's now moving online thinking, oh, panic, panic. What's going to
Doesn't
happen
work,
if the
yeah.
internet gets cut off at some stage?
And
a
then-
lot of us will be stuffed.
Absolutely. And then recently I've been talking about getting people back into stores and what needs to happen. Not only do the stores need to be clean and there needs to be distance and give people that confidence, it is going to be about consumer confidence, going back and feeling like everything's addressed. So not only should it be clean and should there be, hand sanitizer on the way in.
everywhere.
Yeah.
If they're smart, it's a dress shop. I've got COVID pore, I call it, because my hands have aged 20 years in the
because
last... Yeah, so I call it COVID pore. They should have moisturiser on the way out if they're smart.
Yeah.
But to get people...
Or even gloves.
And
Yeah.
be
I mean, if
seen...
they got us to put on surgical gloves gloves when we walked in.
And-
We could touch everything,
But
and
to
then
be
we can
seen
leave
to
again.
be cleaning, have a staff
Yeah, make
member
it visible.
going around making it
Yeah.
really obvious.
And it's down to us
confidence.
as well, because the thing that
absolutely.
I am finding really frustrating is going into stores and
Seeing
basically
everything
pulling
back to
back
normal.
from things.
That's right.
Okay, can you just keep away
Step
from
that-
me?
yeah.
That's
right.
not 1.5 meters.
Going to a supermarket at the moment is a
Oh,
little bit
it's-
like taking your life
yeah.
into your own hands.
I wear a mask.
If we
Yeah,
were
I
all
do
to be
too.
thinking
Yeah.
about social distancing, because
Mask and gloves.
I was reading somewhere the other day that Coles is allowing 350 people per store. I mean, how is that social distancing?
Yeah.
We've all got to walk down the aisles.
Yeah,
So.
And you
And
walk
we-
past each other, which is closer than 6 feet.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and we can take responsibility for that
Yeah.
if we think about it.
Yeah.
The analogy that's been floating around social media has been, if it was the Blitz in London and everyone had their lights off and you thought it was going to be okay for you, would you really turn them on?
That's good metaphor. That
Maybe
one.
not.
Yeah, really
But
great
we've
idea.
got people who are doing the equivalent of turning the lights on by not keeping distance, by not behaving appropriately. And that means that if I do my futurist thing and look a few weeks ahead, it's not nice.
No.
And
no.
that's the issue, that we will go back to things that we thought we'd been able to move through. And hopefully we'll go, oh, that didn't work so well. We can learn from the mistakes that
and we
we've
can
made.
also learn from overseas,
Yeah.
where they don't have borders they can close, and we can see what is happening and what has been happening in all those countries. All right, so let's get off COVID now. And
Please.
we haven't got that long, but I would love to just see if either of you have got some sort of tips for any of the women out there that might be watching this show, who are thinking about setting up their own business or have set it up and are wanting to grow it. On your business journey yourselves, have there been things that, well, I don't even need to say, have there been things you will have learned? Because of course there are, but can you think of them that you could give me a couple of tips that you would say to another young woman who might be setting out in business at the moment? I'll start with you, Jo. Have you got a couple?
Look, I have a mentor that I have different mentors for different things.
Yeah.
And the reason I do that is because of this rule that someone taught me. There's two things that you need to consider when someone gives you feedback.
Yeah.
One, that they have your very best interest at heart.
Yes.
So it might be a family member who wants to give you advice on the new venture you're
worried
going
about
into.
hurting your feelings, but it's better to hear it.
But they really have your best interest at heart,
Yeah.
and they're worried about you losing money or risking
it might
yourself
be.
or getting hurt. And the other thing is that they have some expertise in the area you're talking about. Doesn't mean if you're a bottle shop that it has to be a bottle shop person you speak to. It could be someone in retail. It could be someone you're wanting to learn strategy from. If that's where they're
But
expert.
not a drinker. I'm an expert in bottle
Yes,
shops.
that's exactly right. So that's the two criteria to accept the feedback. So that kind of, anyone that gives you advice, I would say, think of that. Do they have my best interest at heart? Because sometimes
Yeah.
they're competitors or they're jealous.
They're trying to, jealousy
There's
is
some
is a
things
thing.
there.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, do they have some expertise
Yeah.
in the area that you're wanting that advice on? And given that, then you can take on the feedback. And it's good to get feedback because you're subjective in your own experience.
Yes,
so you
it
can't
is.
see outside.
absolutely.
And from my coaching days, that was always the most beneficial thing. I used to say, look for someone who's an intimate stranger, someone who has your best interest at heart, but you
Doesn't
can
know you
tell
really well.
all the deep, dark secrets to knowing it's not going to go anywhere. You
That's
can't
right.
do that with your family
So
either.
someone who's not in your circle of friends, basically, they
Yeah.
can be a
But you
business
can trust
associate or whatever.
and is expert in the area, only the area that you're wanting to speak
That
about.
is really, really
No.
good advice, because
Yeah.
we do go and ask our mums, brothers, sisters, and they've got no idea really,
That's
and,
right.
and they do have our best interests at heart, but with
not
some of
expert.
them, no.
Yeah.
And also that jealousy thing might be.
Yeah.
And there's lots of
Depending-
experts who
yeah.
don't give a rat's about
And
how
they-
you're going to end up.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
they don't understand your context and what you're capable
That's
of.
right.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes and.
Great.
Get experts in to help you. So if you're a designer, you're not an accountant.
Yeah.
Don't
That's-
try and
that's
do
true.
your own accounting.
That's
You
true.
go to the doctor because they're an expert at that. I come to you for the
You're
specializations
so
that you
right.
have. I'm not going to try and do what you do.
No.
That doesn't mean, however, that you shouldn't look at the skills you can build in your portfolio. So whilst I have worked as a brand strategist, as a naming expert, as a researcher, as a copywriter, that's because I recognised I had abilities across the
In
different,
that
few
area, but
different
that
areas.
doesn't mean that you'd be able to
Doesn't
run a
mean-
business, manage staff, work out how to get your funding,
Wouldn't
whatever
even
it might
try.
be. Yeah.
Would not try.
You're
And that comes
quite
from
right.
both my own experience of really, really kind of screwing up some of that invoicing stuff.
Oh,
but-
yes.
Oh yeah. So I've suddenly realised, no, that's actually not what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And so get people around you who can remind you from a position of knowledge and expertise that you need to get someone who can help you with that. And also don't be afraid to give it a go. There are things, and this is that whole mantra around failing. It's okay to fail and get feedback and learn from that as long as you learn from it.
Yeah,
and that's the
true.
biggest issue,
Very
that
true.
failure is not rewarded. And that's okay to understand there are
But
times
there's a
when
few
it's not
memes
rewarded,
that go out.
but you can learn from it.
Yeah, I think I've got a meme that if I make a mistake, I haven't failed, I've learned, which is totally true. That's great advice for both of you. Now, I just wanted, and you're feeding right into my next question, which is before we go, and I will, before the very end, just get how people can contact you, but one of the things that I think that young women really would like to know is whether they should go out on their own or whether they should get some kind of a coach to help them or some kind of support. So what are your thoughts on that, Jo, in 1 minute?
In 1 minute or less, in one sentence or less. Coaching is great, but it needs to be specific to what you're wanting to do. Business coaches can look like they're be all and end all. You may not need that business support. You actually may need the getting over the fear of failing,
Yes,
the putting
so
yourself
like more
out
of a life
there.
kind of coach.
Coach horses for courses, but pick the coach for an outcome, make it a short-term outcome, set a goal and reach it, and then go and do something else.
Whether you want to keep going.
But listen to lots of biographies. There's plenty of people with podcasts now. You can pick their brain, and I've done that my whole life.
Yes.
It's very inspirational. They talk about their failures and their successes, and it also is inspiring, and that keeps fuel in your tank, and you can learn a lot that way. So make your car your podcast central, and it's your own little driving university when you're driving again. But yeah, do that. Coaching is great, but as I said, some coaches want you to go for 5 years.
Yeah.
I don't believe in that. I say
3
short
months.
term, have a goal,
3 months,
achieve
let's
the
see.
goal, let it settle, learn some more, read some
good
books.
point.
Yeah.
'Cause and also the other thing is, if someone is a coach because they're successful, it doesn't mean that they are a good coach. It just means they're
Correct.
good at business. And
Yeah.
like we were just talking about, you can be good at some things and not at others.
Yeah.
What are your
Well,
thoughts
look,
about?
I'd agree with everything you've said.
Jo says.
And from my perspective, I went into doing my own thing because I felt like I would have more freedom, more autonomy, more flexibility,
Yeah.
which was absolute crap. That there was none of that. And that wasn't about my lack of time management or skills to make it more flexible. It's simply the way it is. So be really clear about why you're going out and doing your own thing. Not just around the structural components of having the business in place and everything else. Not just
or
about
that you
thinking,
love doing something
exactly,
and think that if you own your own business,
not,
it'll be better.
Exactly, make sure it's not just about ego. The main thing, and this is from the entrepreneurship and innovation perspective, make sure you've got something that is really relevant and meaningful for people,
people will
and that
want.
you're not just a solution looking for a problem. Because so much stuff gets put out to market that is someone's great idea that hasn't been tested, hasn't been validated, fails miserably. Yes, you learn from that, but you want to do better than that.
Yeah,
And if
absolutely.
you're leaving a big environment because you
Okay.
think I can be more independent, think about breaking the system from the
Great.
inside.
Thank you both so much. That's really, really great advice. Jo, how do people get hold of you?
2 ways. Savvyshopaholic.com.au is the shopping,
Yep,
e
retail
for one
thing.
of a bit of term, and lots of tips and tricks and stuff like that, and some of the segments from today and that sort of thing. And mediasavvy.online.
Which is for your training.
Which is training.
perfect.
And there's a membership site, so there's a little weekly lesson and that sort of thing. So people just want to suck it and see.
They
They're just
can do that.
little
Great.
topics.
Really
Lovely.
nice.
And Brigette, how do people get hold of you?
Best place is LinkedIn for me at the moment.
Okay, so Brigette Engeler on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Great.
I'm
Well,
the one
listen-
that's got a thing up in front of her face.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I have really loved having both of you on here. I hope you found it really useful. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the She's the Boss show, where I'll be talking with more extraordinary women. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, good morning. Tickers New Breakfast Show.
Well, most of the time in the morning, I annoy people.
I think Ben is so fabulous. He is wild, he is warm, he is witty.
The first time I met Alana, I realised I wanted to have a drink with her.
You never know what's going to come out of his mouth.
Kick off your morning with Ticker Jumpstart.
We are playing in uncharted territory.
This preparation takes me all night.
It doesn't matter how long I take, because Ben will always take longer.
Ticker Jumpstart with Benjamin Norris and Alana McLean.
You're going to get some different stuff with us, and we're going to be unapologetic for it.
You do realise it's the morning, so you don't need to be the human coffee.
are now more ways to watch Ticker. Download our apps for Apple and Android devices. We're live on Twitter and YouTube Live. And you can catch us on Amazon Alexa and Google Home. Head to the Ticker website for more. Introducing Ticker Sport.
Mate, how exciting is it to kick off Ticker Sport?
Mate, I'm as pumped as you, which is pretty pumped. We're here to talk sport, business, there's a market, there's a niche.
It's David Davidovich and Adrian Franklin tackling the biggest issues.
Mate, we're talking sport, but we're talking business as well. And as you know, right now, there is no more important time. The world has changed and we are here to react.
Where nothing's off limits.
This is unprecedented. We've never seen sport ground to a halt like it has. Sport's heading in a completely different direction.